Welcome to the Hockey Podcast. I am Luke Lipinski.
And I'm Doug Cannon.
On this week's show, we look at what's potentially shaping up to be a memorable Western Conference final between LA and Chicago, and Doug finds a reason to be excited about hockey in Toronto again.
And as always, we'll start the show off with the number game, which of course I always win, and we'll look at the Memorial and the IIHF tournaments.
It's a lot of lies in one sentence. All that, plus the amazingly high coaching turnover in the NHL today. Let's drop the puck on episode 41. Well, Doug, here we are. 4 teams left in the Stanley Cup Playoffs. 3.5.
3.5?
It feels like there's like 3.5 teams left.
I can see why you say that.
Okay. It's episode 41.
Oh, boy. Here we go.
Time for the game.
Here we go.
Greatest game in the nation.
Episode 41. Wow.
I know. That means we've done 40 of these, if my math is correct.
Boy, you're in the wrong industry.
Well,
tax season was a couple of months ago.
I definitely should be handling heavy finances that aren't mine. So who you got for number 41?
I have, and you're going to laugh. Let me pull up my notes.
I'm already laughing. If you have to look in your notes, I'm already laughing.
I have Jocelyn Thibault.
Okay. Well, you may have just ruined the game.
Why?
What
is he known for?
What is he known for?
Yeah.
I remember he had a cool mask.
He was the one that was traded from Colorado to Montreal for Patrick Roy.
And that's your best number 41?
No, listen. 586 games, 238 victories, 39 shutouts, and a 2.7 goals against.
You know what that is? That's a guy who played in the NHL.
Well, who's your 41?
Jason Allison.
Yeah.
Meh. About 500 points. There's not a lot of great number 41s. You know who my number 41 might be? Mike Smith.
My runner-up's Mike Smith.
Yeah, and he's currently playing.
So he's got a long way to go before he gets put on a pedestal.
That's true, but not too far. If he
bit my tongue.
That's what you get for suggesting Jocelyn Thibault is the best number 41.
I didn't.
You did.
It's a game. I get to pick my 41. Jocelyn, he did good things for Montreal.
You can pick your own, but the repercussions are that you bite your own tongue.
And I just did that, and it hurt really bad.
You know who's a good
I'm going to cry now.
A good number 41. I'm so glad we're capturing this all on tape. Viktor Tikhonov leading the World Championships in points. He was a 41.
Oh, that's right.
I'm just going through Coyotes number
Northern
41
California boy.
That's true.
Playing in Russia.
Playing pretty well in Russia. All right. We got 2 playoff series going. We've got the Eastern Conference Finals, the Western Conference Finals. I listened to last week's show, which was actually 2 weeks ago, and I was in a bad place during that show, and I suggested that the Final Four would be the exact opposite of whatever I wanted, and here we are. It's the exact opposite of whatever I wanted. We've got Montreal, New York, which I thought was going to be a fantastic series, and then Carey Price got hurt.
Yeah, that's tough luck, because, the funny thing, I was hearing a story about Carey Price, where, as you know, in north of the border, hockey is everything.
They seem to care about their teams up there.
So, Carey Price's dogs got out.
Oh, I did hear this.
And some dude found them and returned them. So the radio station, the local radio station goes, "You're our hero." Now Carey Price doesn't have to worry about his dogs. He's going to have a great game, and he did. He won. So then they take this guy that found the dogs, and they give him a suite. And they won again. So then some businessmen got him seats on the glass, and he won again. And then right after that, that's when Price gets hurt. I don't know if his dogs got out.
It doesn't even matter at this point. So was that guy's name Dustin Tokarski? Because he's the goalie now. Is that kind of his reward for finding the dogs?
No, but I did like what the boys did with him after he won his game.
He hasn't been bad.
He hasn't been bad. I mean, geez Louise.
Before we get into that series, let me throw this theme out at you, okay? And we'll see how you react to this. Probably with some sort of Jocelyn Thibault reference. We always hear about how the goalies are the key. More so than ever this year, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, look at it real quick.
Right, New York?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a good chance New York is going to the Stanley Cup, and it's because of Henrik Lundqvist.
Absolutely.
And because, look at the goalies they've faced. Philadelphia couldn't decide between Ray Emery and Steve Mason. Pittsburgh doesn't have a goalie in the playoffs, and Marc-Andre Fleury. And now they're facing Montreal as essentially their third-string goalie. And they happen to have one of the very best. But look at the guys that have been hurt. Mike Smith, before the playoffs, got hurt, and the Coyotes were okay, but you have a guy like Smith to steal games, which is my argument with Carey Price. Tokarski's been fine, but Price would win you games. Ben Bishop gets hurt before the playoffs. Tampa Bay is just done. Anaheim couldn't pick a goalie. San Jose couldn't pick a goalie. They're both gone.
And we both called that, too.
Yeah.
Not so much me on the Anaheim side, because I thought Hiller could push through, and he absolutely couldn't. But you picked it. You were spot on when it came to San Jose.
And those are loaded teams that with a goalie would be...
Right. You would also think, though, that did those guys rely on those goalies so much during the regular season that they thought they were going to be there in the playoffs? Because I don't understand a team as talented as San Jose and a team as talented as Anaheim that your skaters can't win you some games.
Well, that's the thing. I think they can in the regular season. I mean, I'll put Pittsburgh in that same category. A ton of offensive talent, but you need your goalie in the playoffs, which is why I thought Montreal would be so dangerous, because they've got some pieces, but then they've got Price.
Right.
The Rangers have a couple pieces, but they really are just Lundqvist at this point, it feels like.
Well, and isn't it funny that the big star on the Rangers is a guy that only played a partial season with them in St. Louis?
Yeah, and he scores the game winner last night. We're
Right.
recording this after Game 4.
Right. And he's leading in the playoffs right now with 13 points.
And he's scoring big goals. He's already their emotional leader and everything. So, I mean, do you give Montreal any chance in this series? You've known me. I've been picking them all the way through these playoffs, but the second Price went out in Game 1,
Well, if
I
you
thought
listen
they were
to
done.
Brian Giunta,
And I always do.
his quote was, "The series isn't over. By no means are we counting ourselves out. It's a tough loss. It's a bitter loss. But at the end of the day," this is the part I like, "but at the end of the day, we're still in this series." And he's right. And I think the team does have enough talent. The question mark, of course, is the theme of this conversation right now is between the pipes.
If you're going to come back in a series, we've seen it twice in these playoffs. We saw LA come back
Saw LA do it.
3-0
Yep.
because they have Jonathan Quick. We saw the Rangers come back and beat Pittsburgh because they have Henrik Lundqvist. Tokarski is going to have to literally, I think for them to do it, he's going to have to have a shutout in there, and he's probably going to have a game where he gives up one goal.
Okay. You're in the front office of Montreal. All of Canada is watching you.
That's probably true.
Does Peter Budaj stand a chance of sniffing playing time?
No, not unless the series is over.
Right. Okay.
Here's when Peter Budaj could play. You pull off a miraculous comeback and win this series. You're up 3-0 in the next series in the Stanley Cup, and you're winning Game 4 by 8 goals with 5 minutes left. Then I put him out there so he can tell his kids that, sure, he gave up 6 goals in the last 5 minutes, but they still won 8-6.
Yeah, I mean, Tokarski, man, he's got a lot of weight on his shoulder. So we'll see what happens. And I don't even know. I haven't seen the latest injury report on Price.
Oh, I've got one for you.
Well, then bring it on.
You ready?
Bring
Okay,
it
here we
on.
go. He skated today.
Okay.
I have a picture of him skating, which doesn't translate all that well to a podcast. It's him in a warm-up suit, standing in front of a net, holding a regular stick. He's not playing.
No.
And this could go 7 games. He's not playing. And I don't understand. The second he got hurt, they're like, he's out for the series. But what if the series went 4 games, they won, and they went to the Stanley Cup? Was he playing in the Stanley Cup, or is this one of those things where we all know he's done for the year regardless of what happens, but they just didn't want to say that?
Well, I mean, it can't be that bad of injury if he's on ice. I don't care if he's in pads or not. I mean, if you're skating, you're skating. You're using the muscles and the joints. But
this is the first time he's done that.
Yeah. So something must be feeling better for him to be up and at him.
Those Montreal media types are just...
They're salivating.
I would love to be up there.
They're all on the glass at practice drooling.
Yeah, exactly. This picture of Carey Price looks like it was shot from like 7 miles away.
Hey, Jacques, he's skating.
Look, he got groceries. We're good. So, I mean, do you agree with that assessment? Tokarski hasn't been bad, but he's not going to steal you games. I think if Carey Price was in there...
He's a young goaltender, and he's in a really tough spot. I would like to see Montreal win at least another game so that the series isn't over.
I thought this was going to be an excellent series. I was really looking forward to it.
We'll talk about Chicago next, but I really don't want to see 2 particular teams in the Stanley Cup, and we'll get to that after we talk about the Chicago series.
Well, hold on. How about this, though, for Montreal? They were 1 for 8 on the power play in Game 4.
That's not good in the playoffs.
They have 1 power play goal in this whole series. And as much as everybody has... First of all, you got 8 chances in 1 game.
Okay.
So, I mean, you almost have to win a game where you get 8 power play chances. The Rangers in that game had 3. Montreal was 1 for 8. The Rangers were 0 for 3, and that was Game 4. For the series, Montreal has just that 1 power play goal. This is a team that was having success against Boston and all the way back against Tampa Bay because they would end up on the power play, they'd win a faceoff back to Subban, and he'd score.
Right.
Now the power play is just gone, and you're not going to win. I mean, they're following the perfect formula for how not to win a series.
Lose your starting goalie and don't take advantages of your power plays, which I equate in baseball as leaving men on base.
Yeah, or basketball, not hitting free throws.
Right.
They're 1 for 17 on the power play.
Those should, at this level, those should be freebies, especially in the playoffs.
Especially in all these, back-to-back overtime games. They won Game 3, but still, this series could be 2-2 if they scored on one more power play last night. And then all of a sudden, it's completely different. What do you think of all the jawing back and forth between Therian and just everybody with New York? It's been interesting. I love how this series had the potential to be great with, Derek Stepan goes out with a broken jaw and everybody on Montreal's like, hey, his jaw's not really broken, and then he's in surgery and they're like,
he's okay.
He's just having surgery just for effect, right? Prost getting mad when Kreider ran into Price in Game 1, which I think is understandable. Montreal has to know in the back of their mind, hey, our best player's out in the series. We're
not happy.
You need your goalie, yeah.
Yeah, well, that happens at all levels. You don't touch your goalie. That happens in men's league, by the way.
Yeah.
Guys running goalies and stuff, and then not fisticuffs, but a lot of verbal jawing goes on.
I think it happens in men's league, though, because it's kind of this unwritten rule where you're probably allowed to just go beat the other guy up if he touched your goalie. I think a lot of players in men's league just want to be able to beat people up. So that's that series. I'm with you. I hope it turns into the series we all hoped it could be. I would love the press conferences before Game 7.
I'd like to see that series go 7.
It's not going to go 7.
No, it's not. But I really thought Montreal could put a push, and we're just going to repeat ourselves over and over again.
Well, but
without Price, you're not going to do it.
I have 2 quick points on this I want to get your take on. One, Therian getting mad that the Rangers coaches were watching practice and claiming it's a gentleman's agreement that you don't do that. Where do you come out on that one?
I agree.
Okay, because the Rangers did not. And 2, do we know how good the Rangers are yet?
It's the one thing, back up just a little bit. This is the one thing I love about hockey is that hockey has traditions and there's respect lines, and you don't cross them. It's just here comes the unwritten rule.
Yeah.
Look, you got all the video in the world. At the end of the game, every coach gets a video disc of the other teams from the other team's video coach.
Yeah, it's
so
not like
you're
that's
sharing
hidden.
video.
Yeah.
So you're seeing what each coach is doing. You don't need to sit in the stands and do the stare down thing, because that's all that is.
Yeah, it's just mind games, right?
That's just a mind game that I'm going to sit and watch your practice. To me, that's silliness.
Well, a practice where Montreal obviously was not working on their power play. And as far as the Rangers, this goes back to the earlier point I kind of made. They beat Philadelphia. Philadelphia couldn't pick a goalie. It took them 7 games. They beat Pittsburgh, whose goalie kind of melted down. It took 7 games. And now they're beating Montreal, who doesn't have their goalie. I don't want to say New York's getting lucky, because that's not fair. Lundqvist has been excellent. But do we know how good they actually are? Let's assume they go to the Stanley Cup. What chance do you give them against LA or Chicago at full strength?
They lose.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. You're always in it with a goalie like that. St. Louis played well.
Because here's my thought process on that question. A, if Chicago makes it again, that is a tough road for any team back-to-back.
Yeah.
To get there.
Yeah.
They're not going to lose. If LA gets there, LA was clearly the underdog by a lot of people, not even to be sniffing what they're sniffing now. And if LA gets there, I'm sorry, that LA team will just beat New York.
Well, LA has what I thought Montreal would have, in that with Quick, you just completely neutralize the Rangers' advantage in net. There's not a lot of goalies that can do that, but they can play their game too.
Mm-hmm.
So then all of a sudden, it goes back to, I just go back to the Penguins series because it's the best example I can give. When it became apparent that the Rangers are going to be able to get 3 goals a game, that's it, because Lundqvist isn't giving up 4. He's just not going to. Against the Kings, the Rangers aren't going to be scoring 3 goals a game. They're going to be scoring 1 or maybe 2 more often than not. Well, LA can put 2 or 3 past Lundqvist.
Okay. So, points-wise on the LA roster, Kopitar, 20. Carter, 19. Gabrick, 15. Williams, 13. I had to get down to the 4th player on the LA roster to get to 13 points, which is the number 1 guy on the Rangers. They have way more. They got Doughty. I think not only can LA score, but they're a physical team. And they're not afraid to be physical.
I will say this right now, and I'm not going to pick against Chicago. I'm not going down that path. I think if I still had to pick right now, I'd say Chicago wins the Stanley Cup. LA is the most impressive team to me at this point. They are doing everything.
I remember when the playoffs started, I sat down with a coworker. We were having a cup of coffee, and we were talking about the playoffs, and everybody was doing their brackets and stuff. And he looked at me square in the eyes. He goes, LA's going to the Cup. I said, you're nuts. Well, he's a lot closer than I ever was.
What can you say about that team? They've come back from down 3-0, so you're never going to rattle them in a series. You have to have them 3-0, and you have to be beating them in Game 4 before they're going to start to have any self-doubt.
Right.
Quick's healthy, which is, again, something the Rangers haven't seen a lot of.
That was the magic switch, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because those first 3 games of the playoffs for LA, you thought they were done, and then all of a sudden, Jonathan Quick wakes up one morning, flips a switch, and nobody can stop him.
Because he doesn't let it carry over from game to game.
Right.
Now they have Gaborik, who you just read off his numbers. He's scoring. Kopitar, if you look at Kopitar's playoff numbers, they flashed him the other game, and I don't know if I'm going to have these exactly right, but I believe he has 53 points in 65 career playoff games. That guy might be the most underrated forward of the last 10 years.
Well, here's the great thing about Kopitar. He's a +6. Of his 20 points, 15 are assists.
Wow, now who's stat boy?
So what that tells me is he's making the guys around him better. So not only is he super talented, he can score when he wants to score, but he's making guys on the ice better as well. And then that's difficult to defend against when he's got the puck. Is he going to shoot? Is he going to dish? Is he going to do this? He can make guys around him better, which makes the whole team better.
And we just talked about all that. We talked about Quick. The defense just goes without saying. I mean, they have one of the 2 best defenses probably in the NHL right there with Boston. We haven't even talked about the line that's scoring, the 70s line with Jeff Carter and then the 2 youngsters in Tanner Pearson and Tyler Toffoli, who we've heard a lot about over the last couple of years that they were going to be good, and now they actually are good. And the matchup or the combination that Darryl Sutter came up with to put Jeff Carter with them is working to perfection.
Right.
Now, again, Chicago was down 2-0 in the first round. They were down 3-1 to Detroit last year. Being up 2-1 against the Blackhawks just makes the Blackhawks stronger. But the reason I'm looking forward to this series is as these 7-game sets progress, LA gets better and Chicago gets better. So this could be an epic series.
That line has 16 goals so far.
Well, that's the stat I was looking for, and I couldn't find it. But they've been
there. You go.
They've been pretty ridiculous. And the scary thing is they're not going anywhere. So LA is going to have that line next year too.
So they play tonight in Game 4.
Yeah.
In LA. What's the prediction?
This is what I've learned about LA. I never pick against LA in the playoffs. But what I've also learned is I don't ever pick against Chicago in the playoffs. And that's why I'm intrigued by this. I usually have a pretty strong opinion of who's going to win a series. Like, I really thought Montreal would beat New York if they were fully healthy and then Price got hurt. I said last time I thought Montreal would beat Boston, and they did. But LA, Chicago, my prediction is it goes 7. And Game 7's in Chicago. So it's tough to go against them, but LA doesn't seem to care. You ever going to pick against Jonathan Quick in a Game 7?
Yeah, well, I mean, LA has home ice advantage because they won that one game in Chicago.
Yeah.
So Chicago needs to win this game.
And Chicago still doesn't look right. I mean, they look good. They're in the Western Conference Finals, but they don't look like Chicago. You know what I mean? And I know some of that was Minnesota did a really good job of stifling them. LA is just phenomenal defensively. LA is kind of like a better Minnesota.
Well, I think LA is just rolling on confidence and swagger and momentum. I mean, they got all this stuff going for them. And like I said, they were considered an underdog when this all started. And who's going to say that now? Nobody. I mean, if I'm an LA guy, I'm going to step on the ice and I'm going to well, it's up to you to beat me. And I'm just going to carry that swagger in. And they're bringing it every single game.
We did the podcast right leading into the playoffs, so we looked at who the favorites were out of each conference, and it was Boston and Pittsburgh in the East, which that makes sense. That's fine. It was Chicago and St. Louis in the West, which I didn't totally get St. Louis because they were all hurt. And the whole focus of that was, look, Montreal's 11-1 to win the East. What a great, kind of sneaky pick that would be. But how is L.A. just kind of forgotten about again? They just won the Cup 2 years ago, and they just got to the Western Conference Finals last year.
Right, and they have, you can go down their roster. I mean, they have a great roster.
It's better this year.
And everybody questioned it because, those first Quick looked horrible.
Well, that's understandable. If you were questioning LA when they were down 3-0 in round one, that's fine. But going into the playoffs, it's the same roster except better.
I actually said it. I watched a game with LA, and Jonathan Quick looked like Superman. I watched 3 or 4 games, the last 3 or 4 final games of the season in LA, and I said it to you, and I said it on this podcast. He looked unstoppable. And then he goes into those 3 games. I'm like, wait a minute, what just happened?
He does have that. Lundqvist doesn't have those games. Quick will have a couple games where he just gives up 4 or 5 goals. That's the difference between them. But he doesn't seem to care. He doesn't let it carry over to the next game.
Yeah, because I saw him coming 3 feet in front of his crease and challenging shooters. And I'm like, well, if he does that in the playoffs, look out.
Yeah. But the pushback is coming from Chicago here at some point. So stay tuned on that one.
You're listening to the Hockey Podcast. Feel free to email comments or questions to the show at our email address, thehockeypodcast@gmail.com.
Segment 2, we're going to get into the World Championships, the AHL, the Calder Cup, the Memorial Cup as well. Before we get into that, Doug.
Okay.
This is the sort of question that really only you can answer with the sort of anger that I'm looking for. I don't want to write Montreal off, but let's write Montreal off because they're not winning the series.
Okay.
New York against LA or New York against Chicago? Which one is more unbearable to you?
New York, LA.
And I'm not talking about the players on the ice, just the media.
I just don't want to see an LA media mecca against the New York media mecca. And then the worst part about it is if either city wins, you'll never hear the end of it. It'll just be blah, 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 blah. We're the greatest. We're the greatest.
You think that's better if Chicago's in there? Chicago's worse than all of them.
Yeah, but they're tucked away in the Midwest. I mean, L.A. and New York. I mean, don't you think the networks want that? That New York, L.A., coast to coast, East versus West. I mean,
well, yeah, but I think they'd be fine with New York, Chicago too. They couldn't ask for a better.
Well, for travel
Final Four.
purposes, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think LA fans would be that obnoxious. I mean, we're talking about the lesser of two evils at this point, as far as we are going to have to hear about it if New York wins the Stanley Cup, and we always hear about it when Chicago wins the Stanley Cup.
If New York makes the Stanley Cup, and it looks like they're going to, whether they win or lose, you'll never hear the end of it.
That is very true. I mean, we were never going to hear the end of it in round 2 when they thought they were going to lose, and they were booing their players off the ice.
Right.
Now we're never hearing the end of how great their players are, except I haven't heard much about Rick Nash. Do you have anything you want to say about him before we move on?
I've said everything I've needed to say about Mr. Nash.
He scored a goal in Game 1 of the Montreal series, and I believe it was their 7th goal of the game. And I talked to a Rangers fan, and his exact line was, "Yeah, that was like A-Rod when he would hit his home runs when it was 10-0 and it didn't matter." So if Rick Nash gets going, New York is really dangerous, but that hasn't been the case.
Well, I have a friend that his theory is players go to New York to finish out their career.
Rick Nash is not that old. He should not be finishing out his career.
There's nobody banging down his door right now.
Well, I guess not now. All right, Memorial Cup.
What can I say?
The Edmonton Oil Kings win. I don't know what you could say. I was setting you up so you could say something.
So I could say something.
They win. They
You know it's one of my favorite tournaments.
It really is.
I love. And I've recorded every single game. I have to be transparent and honest. I haven't watched every single game.
But you will.
But I will, because that's why they're recorded. And the Edmonton Oil Kings won it over the Guelph Storm.
Henrik Samuelsson, 5 points in the final.
Yes, I would think that Don Maloney, the GM of the Phoenix Coyotes, has to be very happy right now with his young prospect.
Yeah, pretty cool for us just because of where we are. We're in Phoenix. I mean, Samuelsson's from this area. It's not like he's from Sweden. He's from here.
Well, I mean, he tore up the tournament. I mean, he leads it in points. He led it in scoring.
8 points, 5 games.
Yeah, they have to be happy with his performance.
But if you look around the league now, you're starting to see players come in from Southern California and from all southern U.S. states, and to have a guy like that really helped decide the Memorial Cup technically from Scottsdale, but I mean from the Phoenix area. That's just more of the globalization of the game.
And we talked about the game before we started recording. Henrik had 5 points in the championship game.
Yeah, and kind of like the 2 put-away goals. To make it 5-3 and then 6-3. You watch the Memorial Cup, and I don't know how to equate it for U.S. fans that don't watch a ton of it. It's kind of like March Madness. I would imagine it's probably about as big in Canada, isn't it?
Well, juniors is big in Canada, and it's a big deal. And I mean, obviously, I haven't lived in Canada for a very, very long time, but I still follow the Memorial Cup because I just love watching these young guys play. I mean, they play.
Well, the talent takes over. I guess that's the analogy I'm trying to make to March Madness. There's not 64, 68, however many teams there are in March Madness today, but it is that sort of, if you've got a really talented player, there's still that sort of discrepancy that we don't see in the NHL playoffs anymore. Like you said last show, there's so much kind of parity.
Well, and the other thing I love about it is that the CHL is made up of 3 leagues. You've got the Ontario Hockey League, the Western Hockey League, and you've got the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, okay? So you take the top team out of each after the playoffs are done, and then the host city is the 4th team.
Yeah, and then you take London, who didn't show up.
Well,
to their own
that's
tournament.
another conversation.
Okay.
But the point I'm getting at is it's the best of that league, the
Yes.
Canadian Hockey League. It's the best of the best. So you're going to see really good hockey. These guys aren't playing for paychecks.
No.
You know, a handful of these guys are prospects, and they'll probably make an NHL roster. The rest of the guys, they go back to their daily lives.
It's just fun to watch because no lead is safe.
0.
And You're right. It's got that mix of guys who have been drafted,
Right.
but haven't broken through yet. But they're guys that are pretty much expected to break through. I mean, Samuelson was a first-round pick.
Right.
Curtis Lazar was a first-round pick.
Right.
On London, Max Domi, Bo Horvat were first-round picks. I mean, these are guys that are expected to break through. And then there's guys that haven't been drafted yet but are going to be high picks. And then there's the guys that this is kind of the end of the road for them as far as playing hockey to get paid. It's an interesting mix.
And that's what I love about
paid,
it.
But you know what I mean.
You know, and this whole tournament had double overtime, triple overtime. I mean, it was an exciting tournament. Very happy for Henrik. Very happy for Don Maloney and the Coyotes because obviously that pick is really panning out for him. And it'd be really fun because we live in Phoenix. It'd be really fun to see him with the Coyote crest.
Him and or Max Domi, who was in this on London, too.
Right.
Both those guys north of 90 points this season in their respective leagues.
Okay,
Take that.
so before we move on to a couple other tournaments.
Oh, we're not moving on. I got plenty of questions for you.
My biggest beef, and I said it before, is like London didn't even show up in this tournament.
This is kind of like a new thing on the show where I just kind of come up with topics that get you angry.
I mean, London was the host city, so they get a bye to be the 4th team. I have a problem with that.
It would appear so.
They didn't even show up.
Well, I think the issue is more why does the team that gets taken out in their own playoffs, doesn't matter when they get taken out, they can go out in the first round of their own playoffs. They're still in the Memorial Cup.
So what motive do you have to win in the playoffs if you're the host city?
I mean, you still have the motivation of you've played all season, you want to win, but it is kind of weird that a team gets in there that clearly wasn't playing their best hockey at this point. I mean, they're just coming off losing a series, and then that just carried over, whereas all these other teams are coming off winning their respective championships.
London scored 4 goals.
I mean, that's not ideal.
They lost 1-0, they lost 5-2, and they lost 7-2.
Which doesn't make any sense with the offensive firepower that team has.
And what I'm saying is I think that the CHL might want to sit down with a pen and paper and go, let's have the 4 best teams. Or take the 2 top teams from each league, so you have 6 teams, and develop a tournament so that you've got the best. Well, and you don't give the guy, well, it's in my city, so I get to play.
That's like the kid who's like, well, if you're going to come over to my house and play with my toys,
my ball.
Yeah, I get to play too. It was always like the nerdy kid on your street that like, he had the coolest toy, so you had to go over there, but you didn't really want to play with him.
Right.
London's traditionally a great team, and they have a good lineup. So what do you think of my kind of explanation here that it's just simply they were not playing their best hockey? They were just coming off a loss.
Right, they're not playing. They lost in the playoffs, so they're not playing. They're clearly not playing their best hockey. The other 3 teams, they just went through a playoff series and won in the final, and then after the final, they come in and they're playing in a tournament. So you've got 3 teams peaking.
It would be like if there was some just giant worldwide hockey tournament after the Stanley Cup, and you put whoever, let's say the Kings win this year, and you put them in, and then you also put Tampa Bay in.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, they're not going to win.
Hey, look, we've got New York, Montreal, Chicago, and the Edmonton Oilers.
Well, Edmonton, that's a bit harsh, but I knew you had to get your shot in on the Oilers.
Right?
We're 40 minutes into the show.
Well, the Oilers won the Memorial Cup, so they got a little bit of pride.
Yeah, see, somebody from Edmonton won the Memorial Cup. Top 6 teams, I think, is better than trying to arbitrarily pick a 4th.
Right. And the best part about doing that, if they change it up, is now the site's a neutral site.
That's true. Or it doesn't have to be. Yeah, I guess it would have to be a neutral site.
You just rotate the site through the 3 leagues, So every city gets a chance. So every city gets an economic boost, but each site's a neutral site.
It's an interesting idea, and we should be clear, it's not happening. This is just your harebrained idea.
Yeah,
That's
it's
not
my harebrained idea. I'll take full credit for it.
But if it happens 10 years down the line, you can say, hey, I thought of that.
Hey, I want to check.
Speaking of cities whose NHL team doesn't have any success, but at least they're having success at the lower levels, how about the AHL?
Yeah, let's talk AHL.
We might get our wish after all. We might see a Toronto versus Penguins championship, Doug.
Well, the AHL, the Calder Cup, is now in the conference finals. And over in the Eastern Conference final, you've got St. John's versus Scranton.
Okay.
So your Penguins are still alive.
That's it. Penguins,
So
Penguins,
you're
Jets.
happy.
I am. Well, I don't know that I'd say I'm happy.
Over in the West, which my head is still trying to wrap around, I have Toronto in the West taking on the Texas Stars.
There you go.
So I have a team still.
You have Toronto, who, I mean, it's got to be just an annual thing in Toronto now where you just, all right, the Maple Leafs are done. Let's go look at the Marlies. But the Marlies haven't lost a playoff game yet.
No, that's awesome.
8-0 right now.
Gotta like it. Gotta like it. So
This is what we've been reduced to. Nothing against the AHL, but you know, if I want to watch Penguins hockey at this point in May, I have to watch the AHL Scranton Penguins. And if you want to watch Toronto hockey, it's got to be the Toronto Marlies.
they're 1-1 in their series right now. So
the affiliates that are left, it's Winnipeg, it's the Jets Penguins over in the East, and Maple Leafs Stars in the West.
and the funny part too is that, you know, I know the Marlies are on a roll, but law of averages says that's not going to hold up.
Well, that's just the Toronto fan in you speaking.
And the other thing, it's funny that the AHL still does it, and it must be for travel purposes because it is the AHL. They play a 2-3-2.
Yeah, that's weird.
You know, not a 2-2-1-1-1.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oof.
I don't know who has the advantage there, but it definitely is different. I mean, if you are the team that gets 3 in a row, you basically have to win 3 in a row to be in the series.
Yeah, but I mean, think about it. If Texas wins the second game, well, see, it's in Toronto. So, I mean, if Texas has home ice advantage, if Toronto can win, they only have to win 2 or 3 and they're done.
Yeah, I think the home team gets the distinct advantage because you get Game 6 and Game 7.
Right.
And there's so much pressure on that team that doesn't have home ice. They have to win 3 in a row just to kind of hold serve. So, yeah, it goes to the home team for sure.
Now, the NHL did that a while back. I'm not a fan of it.
I like the 2-2-1-1-1 for sure.
Okay, and the other tournament that's done is the IIHF, because we haven't had a chance to talk about it, the World Championship. And, boy, North America.
Yeah, well,
Where'd you guys go?
not past the quarterfinals. That's
Not
for
past
sure.
the quarterfinals, yeah.
Russia finishes 10-0.
So, hang on.
I just wanted to say it.
Hang on.
All right, let's talk about Canada and the U.S.
Let's look at the standings going into the playoffs.
No, okay. Are you going to try and spin this for Canada had a good tournament?
Well, Canada was in first place in Group A, and they can't get past Finland in the quarterfinals.
Finland is just, in any tournament, they're just always right there. That's why I wanted to know if Solani snuck over there and grabbed a quick medal.
I mean, Finland was the 4th seed in Group B.
Yeah, but
Canada was the 1st seed in Group A.
The standings don't matter. The standings through the group round mean nothing. Russia was 7-0. I guess they do mean something. Russia cruised over everybody. They outscored their opponents.
Russia didn't lose a game in the tournament.
31-7 in just the preliminary round.
That's unbelievable.
I mean, you talk about it. Let's take a step back here. Russia, there was all that focus and pressure that they had to perform at Sochi, and they did the opposite of perform at Sochi.
Right.
So I know that this is a small consolation prize to them, but they seem to come out in this and just be like, look, we're winning something this year.
But they failed in Sochi, and they failed in Sochi for one reason. We both said it before the Olympics even started, is that they had too many KHL players on that roster.
Well, it was the insistence that they were going to, whether they were qualified. I mean, some years the KHL players might be the best option, but whether they are or not, they're taking that many.
But we talked about it because North America fell flat on their face in this tournament.
Yeah.
Okay, that's safe to say. But North America always seems to shine in the Olympics. The difference is the Olympics, it's a full roster of top NHL players. The World Championship It's a mixture of NHL players that aren't in the playoffs and some top junior prospects.
For the North American
For
teams.
the North American teams, whereas the European teams, they're all professional players.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, let's just say Pittsburgh or Washington had kept going, then Russia wouldn't have Malkin or Ovechkin, but so much of their roster is comprised of KHL guys, whereas in the Olympics that works against them, here it works for them.
Okay, so Ovechkin gets hurt and drops off. Tikhonov takes over.
Ovechkin gets hurt, and it sounded like, if you read
he was shot.
Yeah, you look at some of the reports, and the hit didn't look great.
Ovechkin's dying.
There was like, whoa, it's pretty serious, and you're thinking like 6-8 months. Is he going to be ready for the Capitals? I read some
knee broken.
Yeah, I read some report where it's like the Capitals' nightmarish offseason gets worse because they don't have a GM or a coach, and now they might not have Ovechkin next year. Yeah, he missed one game.
He missed one game.
One.
He got hurt because of the style that he's played. I've said it since day one. The thing I love about Ovechkin is that not only is he a talented player, but he plays hockey. He plays with grit. He plays hard. He's not afraid to play hard. He's not afraid of injuries. Clearly in the replay when he got hit, he didn't slow down. He was playing, and he wanted to play, and he plays hard. And you're right. He bounces back.
Yeah, he's not afraid of injuries. But how do you think Ted Leonsis felt when he saw his billion-dollar player just laying on the ice in Belarus? And, I mean, how do you think that Pittsburgh felt after that, sending Malkin over there to play? And those aren't the only players, but those are just the main ones on Russia. That is risky. I mean, Eric Stahl got hurt last year, and he was legitimately hurt.
So, anyways, Russia wins the gold, Finland takes the silver, and Sweden takes the bronze. Boy, I just couldn't believe that USA and Canada couldn't get out of the quarters. That shocked me.
But I think you are onto something in that if you look at the U.S. and Canada's roster, and we did this 2 weeks ago, they're not bad rosters.
No.
But Canada is used to playing with Stamkos, Taves, Crosby,
Keith.
Whoever. I mean, that's one line for them.
Yeah.
And whereas now it was Nathan McKinnon's over there, and he's great. And yeah, they probably still should finish higher in general, but Sweden's got their guys, and then they've got their guys that have been playing all season together in the Swedish Elite League. Russia has the KHL guys. That's the best. That might be the most brilliant thing you've ever said on this podcast.
Wow.
Because
I feel good now.
It just encapsulates everything.
I really feel good.
But I said encapsulate, which is a huge word. I hope it overshadows
yes.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
You're tuned into The Hockey Podcast. Follow us on Twitter @HockeyPodcast for even more hockey news.
#do it.
Final segment, news and notes.
Giddy up.
Doug, it starts with breaking news. Breaking news and notes.
Dun, 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 dun.
Sounds like John Sebastian Jaguar, is going to retire.
Oh.
Just kind of sprung that on you.
How old is he?
He's 37. I think it's safe to say he was a pretty big part of Colorado's success this year as a mentor to Semyon Varlamov.
Agree.
But still, when he steps in, he's a good goalie. It's not like he is a letdown if he has to fill in.
What number is he?
He's 35, I looked.
Oh.
Just to make sure that it wasn't going to be 41. A couple interesting facts on J.S. Jaguar, though. Won a Stanley Cup with Anaheim in 2007. And didn't win the MVP that year. Scott Niedermayer did, but he was a huge reason why. Did win the Conn Smythe Trophy in 2003, even though they lost. How's that for you? In retrospect, I should have phrased that as a question coming out of the break to see if you could answer, and I could have set the story up that way. So now that opportunity is gone forever. But here's a question for you, Doug. Let's see if you know this. Which NHL team drafted John Sebastian Jaguar in 1995?
Montreal.
The Hartford Whalers. So without the stats in front of me, I don't even know where I would look this up. I have to think he is the last Hartford Whalers first-round draft pick to retire, correct?
That kind of sounds right, yeah.
Ron Francis isn't still playing?
No.
Okay.
He's in the front office with Carolina.
He is. He's doing a very good job, actually.
Yes, he is. And he's got some work to do.
So the Avalanche lose a fairly significant part of their team, if that's the case. I know he's not the starter, and it'll be interesting to see. I mean, that's a guy that could really...
So who's going to fill his shoes?
Be a coach at some point down the line. Who knows? I mean, there's so many goalies that are going to move around this offseason.
Yes.
That's a whole nother show. Speaking of which, there's a lot of coaches that are moving around this offseason.
Which I kind of alluded to there.
Did you?
Yeah. Ron Francis, Carolina.
Kind of,
sort of.
That's really...
Because Carolina needs a coach.
Carolina needs a coach. Here's a list of the teams that need coaches. Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
Washington,
Yes.
Florida, and I said this to you off the air. They know they don't have a coach, right? This is
I don't know. We can give them a call and find out.
I feel like we should tell them because the draft is now a month away, and as we said last show, you can wait on a coach for the draft, but not if you have the first pick in the draft. You need to know who your coach is going to be for that player who's probably going to play next year, and on Florida might be their best player next year.
But do you really need the coach?
I feel like you do if you're taking basically the face of your franchise. With the first pick, we talked about this in the past too. Look at the last first-round picks in the NHL. You're talking about McKinnon, you're talking about Stamkos, Tavares, Crosby, Ovechkin. That first-round pick, first overall, is supposed to kind of define your team.
Define your team, define your system, define how he's going to be a key part of the puzzle, blah, 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 blah. So
I don't think any of those teams wouldn't have taken those players if they didn't match up with their coach's
So who
system.
will be the number one pick?
Well, that's also another show.
Okay.
I don't know who the number one pick will be. His first name will be Sam, I can tell you that.
Maybe Sam Bennett, you think?
It's going to be Sam something. There's quite a few Sams this year.
Or Sam Reinhart.
Vancouver, well, that's another option now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Vancouver doesn't have a coach either, but they don't seem to be.
They didn't have one last year either.
Well, that's just not nice. I mean, it's uncalled for and it's unprovoked. It sounds like Washington might be close to getting a coach.
And who is it sounding like?
Barry Trotz.
It's not a bad pick.
It's not a bad pick, and I will say this, Pittsburgh was a fifth team that might not have had a coach. They're determining if they're going to fire Dan Biles or not. You can't now.
Well, you can't, but I had heard once Shiro was gone, all the reports were that Coach Bilsma was not going anywhere.
Well, now there's nobody good out there to replace him with. So,
well, you could bring Mike Keenan back from the KHL. He won a championship over there, you know.
Maybe he can go to Vancouver or Florida. He's
already been
to Florida.
He's already been to Vancouver too, hasn't he?
He's been everywhere. So the odds are he hasn't been to Carolina yet.
Well, he hasn't coached the elite team in Sweden, so maybe he'll go there from KHL.
Okay. So maybe he's still a couple years.
All right, so we'll rule out Mike Keenan
for now. You never fully rule out Mike.
What's
Keenan.
that other name that keeps popping up? Mark Crawford.
John Tortorella.
Oh, Tortsy. No?
Barry Trotz to Washington, I like that move if that's what's going to happen for the Capitals.
My only question there is, how does he fit with Ovechkin?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the key. You got to have a guy.
I mean, if you watched any kind of Nashville hockey over the last few seasons, you know that Coach Trotz likes the defensive-minded game.
He does. It's going to be interesting, though, because I wonder how much that was what he was given to work with.
True.
And he
Very
said
true.
a couple weeks ago that he was open to having a more offensive style if his personnel
Well,
fit.
he has the pieces in Washington if he signed.
Because if you're going to coach the Capitals, you've got to basically get the sort of production out of Ovechkin that Adam Oates was getting.
Correct. I agree with that.
And that was kind of why I didn't know for sure why they fired Adam Oates in the first place, but that's a whole different story.
I didn't understand that either. Now, Washington still doesn't have a general manager.
No, they don't. And they're the only team without one, although Pittsburgh only has an interim general manager in Jason Botterill.
Vancouver signed Jim Benning.
So, that's the flip side to having a coach before the draft. You have to have a GM before the draft.
I agree.
And I would assume Washington is
got to be close. If they're close to signing a coach, they got to be close to picking a GM.
They had a kind of an interim GM there, or an assistant GM in the past that they might call up. Paul Fenton, another name that's been thrown around there. But going back to the coaches, though, the longest tenured coach in the NHL. This will give you just perspective on the turnover that we see in NHL coaches, okay? I'm not going to make you guess. It's Mike Babcock, 2005. So the longest tenured coach in the NHL has been with his team since 2005.
As a head coach?
Yeah, Mike Babcock has been the head coach of the Detroit Red Wings since 2005.
Yeah, because he was an assistant under Scotty Bowman.
Okay. And look, 9 years, that's a pretty solid length. But that's the longest in the NHL. The next closest is Claude Julien, who took over in Boston in 2007. But here's the one that's going to throw you. How many teams do you think...
Wait a minute, how long's Lindy Ruff? Oh, with a team.
With this current team.
Well, okay.
So he would have been the longest if we did this a year ago.
And Trotz was
as well, but he's out now. Trotz had been there since the very beginning. How many teams have changed head coaches since 2010? So it's not even really 4 full years ago. Out of 30, how many do you think have changed? And some
15. I'll go 50%.
Some have changed multiple times. 24.
Holy cow.
24 teams have coaches that have been there since 2010 or later. Like, you and I live in Phoenix. You think of Dave Tippett as a relatively new coach for the Coyotes. Only 4 coaches have been with their teams longer than Dave Tippett. That's how crazy the NHL has gotten.
Oof. So my question now is, you've got basically 4 teams looking for a head coach.
Yes.
Let's say 3, because we think or believe that Barry Trotz is going to go to Washington.
Okay.
So you got Carolina, Florida, Vancouver. When you're looking for a head coach, do you look within the NHL ranks, guys that are available, or do you start looking at AHL? Do you start looking at juniors? I mean, do you start looking at the NCAA? Are there a couple of college coaches that you might want to pluck? I mean, where does the carousel stop of recycling coaches from within?
I think Barry Trotz was clearly like the top choice, and I guess technically he's a recycled NHL coach. But from there, if it's me, I'm going AHL, unless you've got a really good
assistant.
Yeah, I mean, like Larry Robinson would be nice from San Jose, but it doesn't sound like he wants to be a head coach, which I can't really.
I think he's tried that and was like, nah, not for me.
So, and that's fine. I mean, he's excellent in the role that he has right now. But yeah, I'm going AHL. The name that's been thrown around a lot for some of these teams is Willie Desjardins with the Texas Stars, who are still in the Calder Cup, as we already outlined.
And then there's actually in that series is the Marlies coach. But he's been a long time. He's been a long time minor, college, junior coach, Steve Spott. I couldn't think of his name.
And Desjardins, I remember his name being thrown around last year for some of these jobs.
Yes, I remember when at the same time Dallas Eakin's name was being tossed around a lot.
Exactly. So I have to think with Florida, Carolina, and Vancouver all still needing coaches for sure. And I mean, let's just say Trotz is going to Washington, because by the time you hear this, he's probably going to be on Washington. One of them's probably, if not more than one of them, is probably waiting on Desjardins.
Okay, so if I'm a front office guy for an NHL club and I've got prospects playing in the Memorial Cup, I'm watching those guys, right? I want to see how they're doing. They're performing because they're performing at a peak level. Why wouldn't I do the same thing at the coaching level? Why wouldn't I be watching the Mem Cup? Why wouldn't I be watching the AHL playoff series? Because that's, that's the farm team system, right? I mean, that's where you should get some assistants. It's where you should get some new head coaches. So why wouldn't you be watching the coaches in the Calder Cup right now, especially when they're in the conference finals?
Oh, I think you have to. I mean, with this many teams needing coaches and the turnover we just outlined, how often can you recycle Mark Crawford? I mean,
right.
Really?
I mean, I was joking with the Mike Keenan thing, but again, I mean, I heard the other day, I was listening to NHL Radio Network on Sirius XM. Keenan's name came up. I was doing it as as a jest, just to have a little bit of fun.
Yeah, but it didn't seem like a joke.
But his name came up again.
Carolina, I guess, could find a way to get Paul Maurice back again. Is that a thing? He's in Winnipeg now, but it seems like Carolina every couple of years goes back to him.
Yeah, I don't know, but I mean, you've got 4 teams in the Calder Cup right now, so you've got the 4 best coaches.
Yeah, in theory.
Right?
There's at least some talent there.
There is some talent there. They've got their clubs where they're going. The Marlies right now are pulling a Russia in the Calder Cup and haven't lost.
Yeah, and that is impressive, and that's not by accident. I just look around and I say, like a guy like Lindy Ruff, you recycle him. He had a lot of success in Buffalo. Clearly,
he had success this season too.
Yeah, I think he was a great pickup for Dallas. I mean, even when it happened, I was like, yeah, you don't want to just recycle guys over and over again, but he hasn't bounced around. He's been with one team. He had success there. At a certain point, it just, your tenure just winds down. He'd been there for 15 years, right?
Yeah.
Same with Barry Trotz. I think he's going to be a really intriguing candidate for whoever gets him. But when you have the guys that are on a different team every 2 years, maybe try something new.
Yeah, I actually don't see anybody picking up John Tortorella, to be honest with you.
I think for him, maybe the best thing is to take a year away from, not away from hockey, you can't do that, but maybe away from being a head coach. Maybe he goes into TV or whatever. That'd be ironic. He's on the media side of things. But whatever he's got to do, and then there's going to be head coaching vacancies next year based on what we see every year. So, he's still a good coach, but it just seems like maybe he's burned out and teams are burned out on him right now.
Right, and his counterpart is being very lucky in New York right now.
Yeah, that worked out a lot better for him. That is it for episode 41. Join us next week as we look ahead to the Stanley Cup matchup, which will be set, and we might even pick the Florida Panthers' next coach for them.
Do we get paid?
Probably not.
We should. We'll also start looking at this year's NHL draft, and we'll also take a look at where the GMs end up.
plus whatever else happens in the next 7 days. Thanks for listening to the Hockey Podcast.